Welcome into the Illini Inquirer Podcast, and we are happy to have back Mike LaTulip, our Illini Inquirer basketball analyst. You see him on the field of 68 sometimes this year. He's got some Big Ten Network stuff he does every once in a while, but I know everyone's happy to have you back on the pod. And Mike, we're going to talk about Big Ten Media Days, what Brad Underwood said, the Big Ten preseason poll. But man, basketball season's right around the corner. How are you, man?
I'm happy to be back. This feels like home to me, man. No, it's crazy. I mean, I talk about it every year. It feels like you're entrenched in football. For you, it's covering it. For me, it's watching it. And all of a sudden, basketball just kind of sneaks up on you. So, Big Ten Media Day feels like, there's official practices and stuff, but Big Ten Media Day feels like the clear delineation of like, all right, we're getting started.
Yeah. There was a 4-minute highlight clip Illinois put out there, which is smart, put out some stuff, feed the people. But we always read too much into it. And I didn't have a lot of takeaways because it's highly selected clips here. But the one thing I will say is, like, when I see these guys, when I see them moving, when I see how tall they are, when I see how skilled they are, and we just know on paper how talented they are. Like, I watched some Michigan State teams come in during your day, Mike, and I'm like, that looks different. Illinois just looks different than a lot of Big Ten teams anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the Michigan State teams. I mean, when I was there, it was like, Gary Harris is running up and down the floor. You got Miles Bridges. There's so many different guys, and there's just a different type of speed, a different type of athleticism, verticality at the rim. Brandon Dawson, like all those types of guys. But yeah, as far as like what you can discern from a 3-minute and 36-second clip, whatever it was, not much. They're going to take out turnovers. They're going to take out missed shots. But, two things I think are real. You touched on one of them, the positional size, the athleticism, I think for those guys at those spots. Because let's just be real. I mean, and I'm the biggest Coleman Hawkins fan maybe ever. I just love what he brought to the table. But Coleman wasn't the best athlete, right? You could put him in there as a stretch 5 man. He can do a lot of things. He's so smart. He's so versatile. But the athleticism you saw on display in those clips, I think is what you can expect this year. And the other thing too is the front court shooting is real. Mm-hmm. Like it's real between Ivisic, between Humrickhouse, Booth. Like that's big time, because the reason why that's so important is, especially if you're going to be a little bit more heavy with ball screens with Kasparis this year, you got to think odds are Kerry Booth and Ben Humrickhouse are two guys that might be in the corner as like shape up guys, or guys that space the floor. So now when you're Kasparis and you're coming off a ball screen, it's the corner guy's man that you're reading on the tag. And if those guys can shoot it and prove that they can really step out, that's going to make, rim runs for Merez, rim runs for Ivisic, pops for Ivisic. Like it's going to open up a lot offensively. So that's something that stuck out to me. But man, 3 minutes and 36 seconds for just like a clip you put on Twitter. I mean, that's gold, I'm sure, for a lot of fans.
More substantial than we normally get. So at least it gives us a glimpse before we see him play against Ole Miss in that exhibition game. So, all right, let's break down some of the things Brad Underwood said. And I'll get your kind of – Brad pretty much, says whatever. He doesn't really gloss over some things. So I don't think we need to translate things, but it's always interesting to think what you hear as a player or what I hear as a reporter to maybe what fans hear. So here's some things Brad Underwood said. We'll go down this great way of talking about the team. You don't make up for Tim with just one guy. He was instrumental in what we did, but those other guys are good and have connections as well. So this is in regard to Tim Anderson leaving the program. I haven't caught up with you yet, about Tim Anderson leaving. Quay Jones gets promoted into that role, and they won't fill this role permanently probably until next spring. So what do you make of what Brad said there and just the departure of Tim Anderson?
Yeah, the departure of Tim, it stings for sure. Tim brought a lot to the table when he was at Illinois, and I think what you come to find is a lot of these guys that have connections, they usually have their hands in a lot of different parts of the basketball world, right? Like he did a lot of training, pre-draft training. There's just a lot of different things that he did to kind of garner those connections that he had. So there's no surprise that maybe he's going off and doing something different. To me, that's not like the biggest surprise ever. But yeah, you think back to, being instrumental in bringing on TJ, being instrumental and I'm sure in the Merez recruitment. Like there's a number of big time players that he's brought to Illinois. But I think, things have changed over the years when it comes to assistant coaches. And I think the best way I can put this is when I was in college, there weren't the two extra assistant coaches. Mm-hmm. So you had typically assistant coach that ran offense, assistant coach that ran defense, and then, a third assistant coach that was doing whatever. So when you lost one of those other assistants, it was like, man, this was the guy that was instrumental in scheming up our offense. This is a guy that was instrumental in scheming up our defense. And I think there's staffs that are doing this. Certainly Illinois has done it, where you got Tyler Underwood, you got Zach Hamer, offense, defense. Now you're insulated from, if you have shuffling, guy takes a head coaching job as an assistant, you don't have to reinvent the wheel with what you're doing offensively. Like, I think one of the more underrated departures that Brad's had in his tenure was Stephen Gentry.
For sure.
Yeah. Like that was one, I think it doesn't get talked about enough because I know he was a big part of, what they were running offensively. And I know Tyler learned a lot from him. So, part of the reason why I think Tyler's done so well taking on these responsibilities is because he was, while he was still playing, sitting in the film room with Stephen Gentry. Right. Yeah. So
we focused on obviously Orlando and Shin leaving for Kentucky because it's Kentucky, but Mark Few stole back Stephen Gentry. Right. So it's like he went to a great program that's had great success. Continue.
Yeah. I mean, so like that's the way things have changed. Right. I think you missed him from the standpoint of like, no doubt a great recruiter, no doubt a great relationship guy. I also think that the program that Brad wanted to create and the culture he wanted to create, I think Tim really bought into that. And I think, as an assistant coach, there wasn't like a JB Bickerstaff thing where it's like, hey, let's get this head coach out of here. And then that guy steps up. That just seems to be what Bickerstaff does all the time. Like it's an assistant coach that was really bought into, to what they were doing. And I think that is important in addition to all the other things that Tim brought to the table.
Yeah. And I agree with you. Like the 5 assistants thing certainly helps. I think you're going to miss Tim on the recruiting trail, recruiting these really good class of 2027 Chicago kids. And I wonder where they go. If like they still prioritize Chicago, like, is that still important to have an assistant with ties there, given the reach Illinois has? Bringing Orlando Antigua in certainly lessens the sting, I think, of losing a guy that's as good as Tim Anderson. And Jeff Alexander's recruited really well. He's got connections up there as well. So I'll be interested, Mike, to see where they go with this next spot.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you want to have Chicago's important, obviously. Do I think it's become less important over the years? I do, just because you have NIL. The relationships, I think at this point, in my opinion, right? Relationships get you in the door. I'm not sure how much relationships close nowadays compared to maybe previous years. But certainly, I mean, you're bringing in Orlando, you're talking about like one of the best relationship guys there is and how well connected he is. And I think, what you may lose on the Chicago front, you may gain on the international front. So like there's a lot of different ways that I think you can go about recruiting nowadays because you have NIL, because you have, a wider net of, recruitment ability. And to me, like the really good programs, that's the way they've done it. I mean, Gonzaga in Arizona, right? The teams that have recruited well internationally, like Gonzaga's like, they're not like, hey, we need to corner Seattle. Or like, we need to, Arizona's not like, hey, man, like we can't let anyone get out of Phoenix. Yeah. It's just, they're obviously big cities in the state that they're in, but, and Chicago is obviously a basketball hub. So is Seattle, by the way. Yeah. But like you have to be more versatile in your recruitment than just, hey, it's all about Chicago. And I don't know, maybe me saying that is controversial, but we've seen over the years that when you put all your chips in that basket, sometimes it doesn't work out. I was there when it happened from time to time. So yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see who they bring on. My guess is they have some sort of ties to the, to Chicago, but if not, maybe it's, hey, ties internationally, ties to other basketball hotbeds in the country. Because Illinois has become a brand. Like I will say that, like much more than when I was there in the 2010s. This is a brand that can, I think, at least a little bit recruit for itself.
Yeah.
Right. Like people have watched this team last year go to the Sweet 16, go in an Elite Eight, not a pretty Elite Eight, but went to the Elite Eight. Like that now, like all these different levers are being pulled, right? So we'll see. We'll see who they end up going after, but Illinois basketball's in a really great position.
Not to mention NIL, and you're starting to grow your NBA presence, right? Like
exactly.
That really helps.
Yeah.
All right, Tomislav Ivisic still is going through the process with the NCAA. His brother went through the same thing, wasn't eligible until I think January, February last year for Kentucky. So that took some time. We thought this was a little bit different. We don't know what the NCAA is going to do. We don't know what will happen here, Mike. But you and I both feel like Tomislav Ivisic, more importantly, you know basketball a lot better than I do. Like he's a really interesting piece to this, a valuable piece to Illinois. So as this drags on, if this does drag into next month and he's not able to play right away, what would this mean for the team?
Yeah, I mean, I think the front court, I don't think Tomislav was going to play 35 minutes a game, right? Like, I think they were going to rotate some guys in at that 5 spot, namely, Kerry Booth, I think, would be slid over to the 5 in some situations. I think Merez certainly would get a crack at the 5. I mean, maybe there's a Humrickhouse, foul trouble situation where he has to slide over to the 5 in some smaller lineups. But yeah, I mean, it's wait and see at this point. I mean, I think we know, again, like what Tomislav would bring to the table. And I know he's a guy that shot it really well in practice too. So, what that brings for high ball screen, pick and pop, delay actions, a guy that, last year your interior post defense wasn't great. And now you got a guy that's 7'1", whereas Coleman was probably better in, managing drop coverage than maybe Tomislav. Tomislav, when it's like throw the ball into the post, is probably a little bit better just because he has more size. So yeah, you definitely miss it. But hopefully with these first few games being, winnable games before you really hit like the tough part of non-conference, I think it would be it's really the Alabama game that's the first marquee matchup. Maybe that buys you a little bit of time. What I don't understand is if his brother just went through this, how do we not have like a precedent for this? Like, how is it not like, I don't understand how they haven't figured this out. It's kind of mind boggling to me.
Yeah, I don't know a lot of the details because Underwood isn't sharing it, which I understand. Publicly.
And when I say they, I mean the NCAA. I don't mean Illinois.
Sure. It is interesting, Mike, because you lose potentially your starting center if this drags on. But man, you have Merez Johnson, a top 30 prospect. You have Kerry Booth, who could be an NBA prospect, right? Like, what do you think a rotation of those guys would look like early in the season?
It's a really athletic rotation. And I think both those guys are bring a different skill set to the table. I think Kerry has the ability, although he shot below 30% last year from 3, like he's got the ability to shoot. I know he's another guy that's been shooting it well in practice. And I think he'll get more higher percentage looks this year playing around the guys that he's playing around compared to last year at Notre Dame. But again, like he's a guy that I think when you talk about interior defense, Kerry may not be the best in terms. He can definitely block shots on the ball, but he is much better suited as like a weak side, come over, help, erase type of guy. And then Merez, like in practice especially, I know Tomislav Ivisic has to become a better drop defender, and there's no better player to be going against in practice getting out of ball screens than freaking Merez Johnson. Because what my frustration with Dane Danger over the years was it's set screen, shuffle out of screen. And if you shuffle out of the screen, those seconds you're wasting because now you're allowing the defense to get back into position. There's no pull, there's no tag, there's no pressure put on the rim. And now you got a Merez Johnson where it's like, now you have to stay out of foul trouble on moving screens. And Kasparis, Kylan, like these guys, you got to wait on the screens to be set to help out your big man. But when Merez sets screens, Merez gets the hell out of there. And it is a one-way ticket to the rim. And he may get the lob, he may not get the lob, but even if he doesn't, you got a guy that is pulling in the defense, that's creating gravity on his rolls, that's getting open looks for Trey White, for Humrickhouse, for Kerry Booth. Like that's really, really important. Like I call Morez Johnson like a modern day 5-man.
Yeah.
Which everybody wants to say like, oh, 5-man, they have to be able to step out and shoot the ball. But not really. I mean, I just watched Zach Edey go 9th in the NBA draft. I mean, Zubac, Plumlee, like there's plenty of guys that fit that archetype of set screen, roll to the basket, and create gravity that way. Like we talk about gravity from like a spacing the floor standpoint. There's gravity from a rolling standpoint too, if you're really good at it. And I think that's where Morez excels. So that's why I like that pairing of those two, or at least if you don't have Ivisic, you can cycle those two in and get a different look.
All right. Brad Underwood also said this team has a higher ceiling than last year's team, which he said was a Final Four team if it didn't run into UConn. The caveat, he said, what could go wrong? A lot. That seems to explain this team, Mike, right? It feels like it could be a team that, if everything clicks, it could be that team to break through the Final Four. But if not, maybe it's Arkansas from 2 years ago that had all that talent, but kind of ekes its way into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think they do have a higher ceiling for sure. Like, I think the offense will be good. Will it top out at number 1 in the country? That's a pretty high bar that I think was set last year by that team. So we'll see. I mean, I do think, again, like interior defense will be better. I think you have more athleticism in the front court. Slightly more positional size. I think just kind of across the board. But this team's kind of up against it because they didn't have a full team in the summer. Don't know if Ivisic is going to be eligible to start the year. This fall, like I said a few weeks ago, or whenever we last spoke, like this fall is really important to be able to say, okay, get our system in, role allocation too. Like we'll probably get into that at some point too, because that's incredibly important. Like they have to make do. Like this fall is so important. Because then you look at coming into the season, and I like the way they scheduled. Bama, Arkansas, Tennessee, all in the non-conference. Like that's speed, that's athleticism, that's a lot of really good lead guards for all those teams. You got to test yourself defensively. You'll test yourself in drop coverage. They'll figure out who they are sooner than I think some other teams that scheduled lighter. But yeah, I mean, part of it is going to be the guy that's going to have the ball in his hands is freshman. Mm-hmm. Potentially the guy that's going to have the ball in his hands second most might also be a freshman.
That's right.
So, that's going to bring some roller coaster elements into it. But look, like, I just think that this Illinois team, it's interesting watching those videos. And we go back to the clip that we talked about in the beginning. Like this looks like a team. Like it looks like a team that can do great things. They check so many different boxes. But Jeremy, it's what I love about this game is that none of that shit matters if you don't put it together. It just doesn't. Like we've seen it time and time again over the years. Arkansas last year, right? Like that was a team that was just at the bottom of the SEC and just had no reason to be at the bottom of the SEC with all the talent that they had. So we talk about like big moments, right? And I think about this throughout my career. We won Maui. We beat Indiana on a buzzer beater. They were number 1 in the country. And like you think about those moments, and those are so enjoyable as a team. But like one of the most underrated moments, and it's like an elongated moment, is like that figuring out like who we are. And it's like, oh, like as the games go on, like this is who we are. This is how we put ourselves in the best position to win games. And that's they're going to figure that out not only through the fall, but in the non-conference slate. And that's what gets me so excited. Because last year, I don't think we expected them to just go like back down, at January 1st, be like, all right, never mind. Just it's Marcus Damas back downs. Let's go. Right. And that changed the trajectory of their season, in my opinion. So we'll see what it ends up being this year.
I know you guys have heard me talk about Home Field Apparel a lot, but there's a reason. I have some of these shirts from Home Field Apparel, and they are a premium collegiate apparel brand based in Indianapolis. And what I love about them is they're focused on creating incredibly comfortable, officially licensed apparel with vintage college designs. So go to homefieldapparel.com and check out their Illini gear. The Flying Illini t-shirt I love. If they have any bomber jackets, go check those out. But you see all of these vintage designs that are great. They kind of stand out in a crowd, but also these are comfortable, well-fitting. They're not the boxy kind of ones you get at the random department store. No, these are well-fitted, comfortable t-shirts and apparel. So go check it out at homefieldapparel.com. Go to the drag down menu, click on Illini, and you'll see all of these great shirts, including Orange Crush, old school Fighting Illini basketball shirts, the Flying Illini t-shirt with the great winged logo, Script Illini gear, including t-shirts, hoodies, an orange ringer tee, the 2004-05 Illinois basketball shirts so you can relive those glory days, but also they have great hoodies, great crew necks, great Illini football gear, including the 80s Illini helmet on there. If you're an old school sweatshirt guy, they got those. If you're a quarter zip guy, they got those. If you want a women's tank there with the Script Illini, they got that. So go to homefieldapparel.com to check out all the great gear they have there. And if you're not an Illini fan, they have more than 180 plus growing list of schools. So you can check out all the gear from all over the country. And right now, use code Illini24 for 15% off at homefieldapparel.com. That's Illini24 for 15% off all of the gear at homefieldapparel.com. All right, this is not a surprise. When they got him, we thought he could be pretty good, and then you saw what he did over the summer. But Underwood did say Kasparas Yakashonis will be the feature guy offensively. This is the guy running the offense, 18-year-old Mike, a guy who I think The Athletic has a top 10 player in the 2025 NBA draft. ESPN has the number 15 player in the 2025 NBA draft. This is going to be really interesting to watch, a lot of fun, I think, to watch, because Illinois hasn't had a guy this hyped in the NBA draft in how long? I know Myers went 11. He was not that hyped going into that season. Illinois, do they have one of the best players in the next NBA draft leading their team at age 18?
Think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
We haven't seen this, so it's going to be really fun to watch, like a potential one and done.
Yeah, and look, like those guys, the international guys are, in my opinion, like I think they're wired a little bit differently. And part of that is, I don't know if his family's coming over. I'm sure they might come over for the season. I'm not really sure how that works. But in addition to like having to adjust to coming over and living in America, like there are also less distractions probably for those types of guys, where like when you're a projected lottery pick that, let's say you're going to, you're going to Duke and you're from Raleigh. Or you're going to Duke and you're from like Charlotte. I don't know. Like
Brandon Miller from a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Like you got family, you got friends, you got everybody that kind of wants to like latch on and, tickets and this and that. Like, I think for the most part, Kasparas should just be able to be like, hey, I can focus on ball. And look, you need, in my opinion, I'm just a big believer. You need a featured guy. That sounds obvious, but you need one, because we talked about like Merez Johnson gravity rolling to the rim. You have to have a guy that tilts the floor. You just have to, right? And Illinois had that. I mean, you go back to when Io really started to come onto the scene early on in his days in Illinois, where he could tilt the offense, he could draw two. Kofi, obviously, and then you got TJ, who started to find himself, really started to command the attention of the defense. Marcus did that last year. And all of that helped Illinois' offense in particular, where it's like, hey, we got a guy that we can run things through, that we can trust with the ball in their hands. But also, I talked about role allocation. You need a guy like a Kasparas that you can be like, okay, that's our guy, and we play off of him. It's not four other guys wondering if they're the guy, because that's how you're, to me, like that's, talk about Arkansas last year. I can trace a lot of teams that have underachieved back to that. It's don't have a clear-cut guy, so then five guys think they're that guy. And when five guys think they're that guy, your offense gets choppy. There's not any type of buy-in defensively, and then you lose games. So I think having a piece like this allows more pieces to fall into place, right? I think it's important for Kylan Boswell to be like, hey, I'm more of like probably a secondary ball handler, catch and shoot, really, really dig into guys defensively. And then, for the rest of these guys,
right? Like for him to play that Trent Frazier to the Iota Sumu kind of role.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And honestly, like in some ways, the Iota Sumu to the Andre Curbelo. Like Curbelo came in and started taking some of the ball handling duties, and I was like, cool. Like I'll space the floor, catch and shoot, catch and rip. Like that's why part of the reason why that team was so successful was because Io bought into that for a freaking freshman coming in.
Yeah.
So I think that's something I think all these guys can learn from is like that team was a 1 seed that year. Io was fantastic, but Io knew, hey, Curbelo's doing some special things. Okay. Curbelo's setting us up in ways that, maybe I can't, or maybe it's not like my strength compared to some of my other strengths. And that's why they were Trent the same way. Trent, there was like no ego with those guys. So that's what you fight this year if you're this team. It's right. Like Trey White comes in, all these guys probably want the ball in their hands, want shots, and the quicker they buy in, the better. But having a guy like Kasparis it's huge because I think he can take that on and excel.
And it's one thing I don't have on my list here, but I should bring up is, I loved when Brad was talked about, the depth of this team is like, yeah, we have depth right now, but like, how does it feel when you're not when you're the 9th guy and 10th guy that's not playing very much? Because that's going to happen to somebody that we think is talented enough to make an impact on this team. Like Dre Gibbs-Allhorn probably went through it last year, and I was
going to say we haven't mentioned. That's one guy we haven't mentioned 25 minutes into this podcast. Yeah,
Trey White we haven't mentioned. Like he could probably go lead some team in scoring. He kind of went through that last year, so maybe that helps him. But some other guys who come in here with expectations, like a Kerry Booth, if Ivisic is ready to roll, like how many minutes is that guy going to get when he could be one of the best additions on some other program in the Big Ten? Like Brad is real with it. He's like, we'll see how they handle it because this is a new team. This is 10 newcomers, and you got to figure it out. So like all the offseason stuff sounds good, Mike. Sounds like they are bought in, but how's that feel in December and January? Like Dane Danger was pretty.
Yeah, we've talked about it. Yeah, we've talked about it before. Like I don't care what your team chemistry is in the spring. Like I just don't. Shots haven't been allocated, roles haven't been allocated. Like it just in the fall even, right? Like maybe some guys get a little bit of a sniff of like, hey, I don't know how these minutes are really going to shake out. But for the most part, your top 10 guys are playing 5-on-5 against each other in practice every day. Like everybody's still getting somewhat of an equal opportunity. Now, I may have guys in orange jerseys and guys in blue jerseys where you sit there and go, oh, shoot, that kind of looks like that might be the starting lineup right there. If that's the way Brad's, mixing it up today. But yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think the one thing that I'll say is like, when you have guys that maybe aren't playing as much as they think they should, and this is just from my experience over the years, you better win. Because if you win, you can at least be like, hey, what we're doing, we're on the right track. Now, you always have to iterate and you have to continue to go back to the drawing board even after wins and seeing how you can improve your team. But when you start losing, now that's when things get louder for the 8th, 9th, 10th guy, because them, potentially, their parents, potentially, people in their circle, potentially, are saying that you're losing because you're not getting an opportunity. When really that, I'd say most times, is not the case. Very rarely is it like, man, we start playing this 9th guy and we won 10 straight. Right. Like it's just, and I've just come to learn to trust, like when it comes to rotations and when it comes to starting lineups, all those types of things, coaches and programs get it right probably 98% of the time. I've lived it. I've seen it. I was at practices where I saw the person that everybody was clamoring for to get minutes. I've talked about this before. It's like, we need to give this guy a shot. I'm like, that guy missed practice yesterday.
Yeah.
That guy overslept and missed practice yesterday. And then he came onto the floor and he can't guard a ball screen and he's getting torched defensively. And is it like, we see all this in practice and then you see the outsides, like, how are we not giving this guy a shot? And it's like, there are so many other hours that take place in the film room, on the court, all this stuff. Like this stuff is going to naturally play out. And the guys that rise to the top are the guys that have put themselves in the best position through their work, through the spring, through the summer, through the fall, into the season.
Yeah. All right, Mike. Brad Underwood said this is the most talented group of freshmen that he's had. We've talked about Kasparis. We brought up Morez Johnson, but there's a 5-star 18-year-old from Canada and Will Riley. And you mentioned, I mean, that could be your second playmaker. We talk about Kylan Boswell potentially in that role because came up as a point guard. He can handle it a little bit, but we talk about positional size and skill and scoring. There's another guy that can handle it.
Yeah, I mean, he's gifted. He's gifted, man. Like he, I mentioned like he could be the second leading scorer on this team. Like that wouldn't surprise me at all. Trey White, I think, is going to be in that conversation. Like there's going to be a few different guys that are Kylan. Like those guys are going to be in that conversation. But yeah, I mean, I think
I had ESPN number 22. I know the offseason is happening. They're talking to coaches like Gavoni and Wu and all these guys, but he's at number 22. So Illinois right now has 2 of the top 25 guys in the draft pool.
Yeah, both freshmen too, which is wild. And one's a reclass too, which is even crazier. But yeah, like I think the positional size for this team is going to really help Will, because I've talked about it before where Will's 6'8", 6'7", 6'8", something like that. If he was 6'3", 6'4", his frame would worry me a lot more. Like I see a lot of talk about his frame and his strength. He is noticeably bigger since he got on campus, which is no surprise. Like Fletch is one of the best in the business. But when you look at Will, what he can do offensively, that kind of goes without saying. I think he can come off ball screens. He's a really talented shooter, catch and shoot off the dribble. I've talked about how comfortable he is shooting uncomfortable shots, because when you get knocked off your spot with that frame, like you got to be cool flowing into a fadeaway, flowing into some off-platform shots, and he does that. But defensively, and I know we'll get to that. But defensively, I think there's just ways with how many big wings there are in the Big Ten. It's just the nature of it. Like there's a lot of big wings, and I think you can put him on guys like that. I do. Now you probably don't want Will guarding like a water bug guard.
Yeah.
And you also don't want him guarding like a 5, but like there's so many guys from that 2 through 4 spot in the Big Ten that you can put him on. And what we've seen is like, and what you hear is like, he'll compete. So I don't worry about any of that stuff. And he's so smart. Like guys that are that smart offensively usually are that smart defensively, because they know angles and positioning, and that's what's going to really help him. Where I'd like to see him help out early on is on the glass.
Yeah.
Like I think he's got a nose for the ball. I think he's I'd say an above average athlete, good athlete. That's where he can really make a difference. So I'm really excited about him, because he again is like, he's a guy they haven't really had. If you think about it, like a 6'8" kind of swing man, like can shoot it, can make plays off the dribble, can facilitate. I don't know. I mean, it's been a long time. Like
that guy, right? Like Terrence isn't that guy. He's just a physically imposing, downhill kind of guy. Yeah, this is skill. This is score at every level. And if he's got like a 6'5" guy guarding him, I mean, you talk about positional size, it sets you up for matchups, right? And they're always matchup hunting. So you got a 6'6" lead guard, right? You got a 6'8" small forward, a 6'9" we'll get into Ben Humrickhouse, like, and size obviously at the 5. Like you can really hunt some matchups there.
And I think too, his ability to shoot the ball is going to come in handy, because I do think when I watched him on the AAU circuit, and when I see him in some of the clips in practice, and I think I'll be going to practice in the next few days, so I'll get like a real in-person look. Like when he drives, he is confrontational. Like it doesn't look like he really shies away from contact, and that's so good, because
this offense miss more than anything is free throw attempts, right, from Terrence Shannon.
And I think that's an area where, like, if he's strong taking the ball to the rack, now he's a freshman, he's not going to get every call, but he goes and he tries to punch him, like he does. And I think if that can get him to the line, and then you talk about just a guy that you want to have in a flow and a rhythm, if he can shoot, even 3-4 free throws a game, that's going to set him up to have, I think, some efficient games from the floor, and that's only going to help his team.
All right. As a duo here that is very high on the Ben Humrickhouse edition, Brad Underwood said Humrickhouse is the guy people aren't talking about enough. There's been parts of this offseason, Mike, where I'm doubting, like, is Ben Hummerkaus going to be that starter? Is he going to be a top 3 scorer like I think he is? Sounds like he's settled in as one of those consistent guys because he could just shoot the cover off the ball.
He can, yeah. And I think the thing that I'm looking for with him is you were NAIA, you made your way up to Evansville, and there's a certain belief you have to have in yourself to do that, and to say, hey, I can go from this level to the next level, and I can still be a key contributor, and I can help win games. And now you go to the big time, right? Like now you go from Evansville up from the Valley to the Big Ten, and as a guy that's probably not going to have the ball in his hands as much, certainly as he did at Evansville, but I don't think he'll have it in his hands as much as Marcus did. He's going to need to be really mentally tough this year, because you need him to be able to shoot the basketball, and there's going to be games where like you can't go. There's not going to be games like there was maybe playing against Illinois State where it's like, hey, I'm 1 for 7 in the first half, and then I'll get, 6 more 3-point attempts in the second half. Like that may only be, hey, 3 attempts in the first half and 3 attempts in the second half. And like that lower volume, you have to really continue to trust your ability to shoot the ball and have faith in the work that you've put in. Because like he needs to be a guy that's like, you leave me open, it's going up, and if it's going up, it's going in. And like that is only going to create more space for this offense. I think he can make a little bit. He can, if he gets in trouble, he can make a pass out of it, is what I'm saying. So yeah, there's a lot of reason to be high on Ben, because I just think he's just a tough player. He's a smart player, and you start to see a theme throughout this roster. There's a lot of guys like that possess that, and for him being an older guy, for him, I'm sure wanting to make the most out of this transition to the Big Ten, he's going to need to be that for this team. And I think he's certainly shown that thus far. And you just want to see that continue as you head into the season.
Was anybody else happier that Kasparis came into the program than him?
They all should be happy that,
Kasparis
came in, but him in particular, like I talked about, if you're going to run more ball screens and you got Ben as a back action guy coming up, shaping up to the wing, spacing in the corner, like he's going to get more higher percentage looks than he did at Evansville. I mean, some of the shots he took at Evansville, some were off the dribble, some were hand in his face. Like there might still be some of that this year, and he's got a quick release, but he'll absolutely have more catch and shoot looks than he had in previous seasons, without a doubt. And it'll be in part because of Kasparis.
Yeah. One of the best quotes Brad Underwood had: defensively right now, a 7th grade middle school team might hang 100 on us. We stink and we foul too much. This is Brad Underwood. This is the good stuff, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, like that sounds like a coach. It's like, I talked about it after the season. I'm like, this is a very like secure staff. Yeah. Like they're just, they know when you've won consistently over the years, when you've won, I think still more than any Big Ten team in the last 5 years.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, talk your shit. Like, it's like, that's the best way I can put it. And I think there's a certain level of accountability, especially on that end, when like, hey, if you want to win championships, like for this Illinois program, it's gotten to the point where like you go to the tournament and that almost feels like a given at this point. That's the position you put yourself in. You go to an Elite Eight, probably like Brad said. I mean, that was a Final Four team last year that ran into UConn. So now you start eyeing not only Final Fours, but what about cutting down the whole thing? And if you're going to do that, you got to guard. I mean, and I'm not just saying that because it's like, defense wins championships. No, literally, like you go back and look, all the teams, let's just go back to 2010, right? Duke, top 10 in both categories, offense and defense per KenPom, right? 11, 14, and 21, which was UConn in 11, UConn in 14, Baylor in 21. Those were the only 3 teams since 2010 that were outside of the top 11, because there were like 4 teams that were 11th defensively. The only 3 teams outside of the top 10 or top 11 defensively per KenPom. And even though they were outside the top 11, UConn in 2011 was 15th. I think Baylor in 2021 was 22. And I think it was only 2, because even the 2014 UConn team was 10th.
Yeah.
So there's only been 2 that have been outside the top 11 defensively. So you still obviously got to be really good offensively, but 80th ain't going to get it done like it was last year. It's just going to be really hard when you play against those other teams that possess those abilities. You got to be perfect, basically, even though you have a really great offense. So they're going to fight, some of that is going to be fighting human nature, right? When you have a really good offense, we saw that last year. It's like, all right, Minnesota can score 95. We'll score 103. And that's great. And it's great that you can do that. But look, they're likely going to be in drop, right? And if you're in drop, you're limiting 3-point attempts. And if you're in drop, you're staying out of rotation. So that's likely going to be the defense that they have most times this year. So what's that not going to do? That's not going to force a ton of turnovers, because that's not what this Illinois team has done over the years. So if you're not forcing turnovers on the other end, now you can't turn the ball over offensively. All that contributes to what you do defensively, because last year, the shift that they made offensively, let's trace it back to January 1st, because they weren't doing it much in the bragging rights game. January 1st, when they said, hey, we're going marks to mask back downs. Okay. They went from start of the season to January 1st, like 200th plus in the country in turnovers. Mm-hmm. After that point, they were like 27th. I think they finished the season around like 50th, right? But it's because they made that shift where there's not as many moving parts. You go to the back downs, you drain some clock. You're typically getting a shot up on the rim. You're getting offensive rebounds because you're getting better rebounding position. All of that factors in. So when you shift now back to, hey, maybe it's less back downs and more ball screens, there's a chance that there's more turnovers. Mm-hmm. And you got younger pieces in certain areas. So now there's even more strain on your defense to be good. So it's a good opportunity. We talk about all the depth on this team. I think the guys that buy into that end are going to be the guys that play a ton. And I'm looking at, you got some freshmen, obviously, but Kyle and Boswell, like that's got to be Trey White. Like that's got to be somewhat your calling card.
Yeah, and obviously Ty Rodgers, Dre Gibbs, Allhorn, if they want significant roles, they got to be really good there.
Absolutely. So that's all important. But I would like to see the 7th grade. Man, I don't know what 7th grade team that would be, but it'd
be pretty damn good.
It'd be a fun matchup.
Yeah. Brad Underwood also said this. You mentioned it kind of. The Elite Eight is a great step, but we've got 2 more we would like to play, and we got to keep striving to get there. It's pretty. I don't know. Jarring is the right word, but it just kind of hits you in the face sometimes that Illinois talking about national championship, Mike. That's a great place to be. It's confidence, but obviously you still have work to get there. And it's a big reason Brad Underwood goes, we need more talent. And they went out and got more talent this offseason. But just what do you make of Brad Underwood? Just put it out there. Like we want to compete for a national championship.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's earned the right to say that.
Yeah.
This team has operated, probably not 2 years ago. I mean, still a tournament team 2 years ago and had some high moments, but, last 3 or 4 years, this team has operated as one of the better programs in the country. Mm-hmm. And part of that is you got to win consistently, which they have. Even when you have turnover in the program, they've done that. I think they've set a really good foundation of what's expected over there. And then you're starting to have more guys pop up on NBA mock drafts, and you're getting that type of talent. All that is usually a recipe for having success. And you've found an offensive system, and you've found a way to work things offensively that has breed a lot of really good results too. So it comes down to the defensive end, like I said, but you're right. I mean, again, I was there from 2012 to 2016. My freshman year, it was a stark contrast between that year and a few years after, where we had less success. And there's all these details that matter in that. We talk about all, NBA talent, all that stuff, winning consistently, but what contributes to that? And it's not having guys get arrested. It's not having guys miss practice, show up late to shoot around, all those things. Like my freshman year with Brandon and DJ Richardson and Tyler Griffey and those Sam McLaurin, like those seniors on that team, and Tracy was a sophomore, Nana was a sophomore. I don't think anybody was late to anything ever, not once. Film session, food, nothing. Like guys were on time, doing what they were supposed to do, and it just all factors in. So if you're a program that's done all those other things that I mentioned at the beginning, and you're a program that's bought into those types of details on a daily basis and understand that those contribute to winning and consistently winning. Yeah, now you got one of the best programs in the country because you've gotten a taste of it, and a taste isn't enough. Like it's time to go for the whole thing.
All right, Mike, we got about 10 minutes here to talk about the Big Ten preseason poll. And I sent you some homework about what you think of this poll. Purdue picked to win the Big Ten after winning the last couple of years, 20 first place votes. Indiana got 7 first place votes. They're number 2. UCLA and Illinois each got 2 first place votes. They're 3 and 4. Michigan State got 1 first place vote. They're number 5. Then Oregon, Rutgers, Ohio State got 1 first place vote. They're 8th. 9, 10, 11 is Michigan, Maryland, Iowa. Tied for 12th, Wisconsin, Nebraska. And we wrap it up with USC, Washington, Northwestern, Penn State, and Minnesota. So just give me a team you think is like, give me a team or 2 or 3, whatever you want, that you think is like right on the money. Like you think this is really good expectation.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first one's Rutgers. Too much talent to be in the bottom half, right. I think. But probably too young in some important areas to be in like the top 5. I think that like 7, 8 range is pretty fair. I mean, they were obviously pretty close to being, flipping them with Ohio State. I think Purdue at 1 makes sense, right? I mean, you return the most minutes.
I went with them, and I know it's going to anger people. It's like, you lost one of the best college basketball players of all time, but the guards are good. It's going to be different without Zach Edey, but they're pretty dang good anyway. But then they've added some nice pieces. They've developed talent. And the biggest thing I went with is the coach, Mike. I side with a lot of coaches in this era of a lot of turnover of who's consistent. And Matt Painter's just so damn consistent.
Yeah. And if we're talking about Brad Underwood and a guy that's been able to win consistently, I mean, Matt Painter's right there too.
Yeah.
So like there has to be some sort of trust in the staff. That's why I said when I did my rankings, coaching matters. Like as a coach proven to be able to flip things and adjust and shuffle around personnel and shuffle around scheme to produce, or to put out the best product on the floor. I think Matt Painter's done that. So you got a preseason player of the year, which I think was the right pick. You can say, oh, well, Zach Edey is gone and Braden Smith isn't going to be anything without Zach Edey. I just disagree with that. I mean, he's way too talented. He's too good of a point guard for, to not have that type of player of the year type of season. You return 54% of your minutes, more than anybody in the Big Ten.
And by picking Purdue, it's not saying like I think they're the national championship team. It's that I think they have as high of a floor as anybody in the Big Ten, in this Big Ten, because it's hard to pick this Big Ten.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I looked at too. The other one that I thought was kind of right on was Maryland. I don't really get, there's a few people I've seen that are like, Maryland's like a top 5 Big Ten. I don't see that at all. I think they're going to sorely miss Jameer Young, period. I mean, he saved them from being one of the worst teams in America last year, in my opinion. But we'll see. Like Gillespie, Miguel, Sean Harris-Smith. We'll see with Derek Queen and Julian Reese how they kind of manage that front court. I don't know if they got better offensively. I really don't. I am certain they got worse defensively. I mean, that's a top 15 defense in the country last year, and you lose some key pieces to that defense. So and you got some youth in some areas too. So that's Maryland was another one that I thought at 10 was like bottom half and then slightly towards the back. That makes sense to me.
All right, 3 teams or a couple teams, Mike, you're higher on than they were ranked here.
Northwestern at 16 is an abomination. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I had them.
It just is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still like their pieces. I think Barnhizer, last year he put together a stat line that hadn't been done since Draymond Green this conference. I think, he's a guy that can be a first team all-league guy. I truly believe that. And Barry's steady. Martinelli, I think, really came on last year. Nicholson, I've always loved what he's brought to the table. He's got to stay healthy, but as a screener, as a rebounder, as a guy that knows his role. And then we'll see what Jalen Leach adds and how much of the boo-booey slack he can pick up. But like, there's so much turnover in this conference, and it's like we use the the criteria we use for Purdue, it's like, hey, they returned some guys we know, they got good players. Like, how is that not the same criteria for Northwestern?
Right.
Right. If we're going to put Purdue first and Zach Edey's gone, why are we putting Northwestern 16th when Boo Booey's gone?
Yeah. And plus
right?
coaching, like Chris Collins is a good coach.
And that leads me to my next point. It's like Collins is going to coach them up.
Yeah.
And they're going to, they're going to be a team that guards, that turns you over, that traps. And for all these teams that are trying to figure out who they are in the Big Ten and like what system's going to work for us, what are we going to run? That's a team that I think knows pretty damn well what they're going to run, especially defensively. Yeah. And they've hurt teams over the years with that. So, that's one for sure that I thought was just outrageous. 16 is insane for Northwestern.
Anybody else you want to mention here?
Iowa.
I had them 7. They're 11.
Yeah, I mean, similar reasons. Sanford, Dix, Freeman. That's a really good returning core. I think Dix can make like an all-league type of jump. I think his efficiency was so good. He just needs a little bit more volume. That'll come with Tony Perkins gone. The additions that they made, I thought, Traore coming over from Manhattan, he's just a more athletic, dynamic piece that they just really haven't had over the years. And he can play, he can play in the front court and guard in the front court because he's so big, but he can handle the ball as well. We saw Drew Thelwell for Morehead State last year, their point guard, one of the top assist guys in the country, really good at setting the table. That's going to help Sanford. That's going to help Dix. That's going to help Freeman. This is a good team. Like I don't see why they would end up at 11th with all the other question marks with some of these other teams. So that was one. And then just quickly, Oregon, you could flip Oregon and UCLA for me, and I'd be okay with that. I think, they're at 6, but I wouldn't mind if they were a little bit higher.
All right. Any teams you're lower on? I can guess one.
Michigan State.
Yeah.
Michigan State's 1. I mean, I think 5th. Who's the guy on that team? I mean, we're going on year 3 of the Jay Nakins breakout season thing. So can Fears be like a true lead guard where like he's winning you games? I don't know. I mean, Tyson Walker kind of had that like late game IO like clutch gene where it's like, hey, ball's in his hands. Who is that guy for them? Is it Fiddler? Like, can Fiddler come up from Nebraska Omaha and be a 12, 13 a game guy? And can he help carry them a little bit? What do they do with that front court, right? Like, is it, I know they like the Zapala guy.
Yeah.
You got Cooper, you still got Kohler. Which way do you slide Booker? Like, Booker came in, it was kind of like running around last year. And do you slide him to the 5, right? Or I saw in their whatever green and white scrimmage, he was taking dribble handoffs on the wing and shooting threes. So he could go either way.
They're counting on Booker to be a star. If you were counting on that, why did he not play more last year?
He's not just going to be a star right out of the gate this year, because I think he's still going to need to understand who he is in real games. So, there were definitely some flashes last year. He's got a beautiful stroke. I think he can shoot it. He's a gazelle. He runs fast. He gets up and down the floor. Now it just comes down to like the strength component of it, right? If you're going to be guarding guys in this conference, like how physical do you want to be? And a lot of times that's not physical strength. That's mentally like, can you survive the wear and tear of the season? And I don't know. I mean, but I do like their freshmen, Kurt Tang and Jace Richardson and Jesse McCullough. Like, those are all guys that I think are going to have some sort of role in this rotation, and we'll see if one of them ends up popping.
Give me one more. You got any more?
Nebraska.
You're lower on them.
I'm lower on them. I think, and they were 12. Like I'm not saying that like flip Nebraska Northwestern, but I'm kind of saying it. I just, the Mass not being available this year is just huge. I mean, he was such a fulcrum for them last year, especially offensively. He's smart. He could, he was air traffic controlled defensively with a lot of the rotations that they were doing last year. And I don't know. I'm going to need to see something from the backcourt that's like the ghost of Big Ten's past with Decision and Aaron Eulis. And, and then you got Rolly Worster coming over from Utah or Utah State or
Kaiser,
whichever one it is. Right? Yeah. And Gavin Griffiths.
Griffiths.
I mean, it's I have question marks about that backcourt. Yeah. I do. And I don't know. I like Bryce Williams. I like Juwan Gary. I don't think either of those guys are number one options. I just don't. So I don't know who that's going to be for Nebraska. And I think that's going to be, when we talk about like role allocation, like we did earlier in the pod, like that's my biggest concern.
Mike LaTulip, you're the goods, man. It was good catching up, talking some college hoops. I'm sure we'll do this right before the season as well, man.
I'm sure we will. Looking forward to it, man.